Welcome to the Old Man of Three with JJ Redick and Tommy Alter. This is a very special bonus episode with the Dunker Spot, Nekias, Duncan, and Steve Jones. We are very excited to announce that the Dunker Spot is now part of the 342 production family. This is a podcast that I have been a fan of for a very long time. Nekias and Steve do high-level breakdowns of everything happening on the basketball court in the NBA. Their knowledge, their passion, their consumption of the NBA is unmatched. Nekias is a writer for Basketball News. He's followed the NBA for a long time. Steve Jones is a former assistant coach in the NBA. These two guys are just a dynamic duo. We're so excited to partner with them in partnership, of course, with Wondery. And based on this conversation on just a few topics about the NBA, you see their level of knowledge and information is so high. We can't wait to work with them over the next few years. This is the Dunker Spot with Nekias, Duncan, and Steve Jones. All right, let's welcome in Nekias, Duncan, and Steve Jones of the Dunker Spot, the newest members of the 342 Productions family. Guys, I cannot tell you how excited all of us are at 342. Number one, to have you on board. And number two, to finally get this fucking done, because this was months and months in the making. Literally, I think, Nekias, the first time you and I spoke about this, I want to say was like August, probably. It was either August or September. This has been an ongoing conversation. We finally got it done. So welcome, guys. Welcome.
Just the borrow from Steve. Happy to be here. Excited to be here. But no, in all seriousness, very excited for the opportunity. Just glad that we have yet another platform to talk hoops and have fun digging into the intricacies of it. I feel like there's plenty of room to do so. And so happy to be able to continue to do our part.
We gave you guys a lovely intro at the beginning of this podcast. But for our listeners and our viewers, pitch me on your show. I mean, I know your strengths, but where do you sort of see your podcast fitting into the broader sort of scope of NBA basketball discourse?
Well, I think our strengths are as cliche and as basic as it sounds. We just love talking about basketball, what's actually happening on the court, digging into what actual adjustments are being made and just keeping it at the heart of what the game is. I think that's where we thrive. Steve, what you got?
I mean, we love the game, and in this game, there's so much room for so many different stories, but the game usually tells the best story. And being able to focus in on that, dive in on these teams, appreciate these players and what they're bringing to the table, and add that so that more people can watch these games and understand different things or see the peaks and valleys, the adjustments that are taking place. And I love doing that, and I want to continue to inspire people to enjoy the game in a different way. And you know, we just love it.
I feel like one of the things that we all love about it, not even just the pod and the video stuff, but even just the Twitter accounts, everything you guys do, is how excited you guys get about small things that people may like, even like real basketball fans may not, focus on. In the last 2 weeks, do you guys each have a thing that you have been particularly excited about? Maybe you haven't tweeted about yet or talked about on the show yet that you want to share with everyone else?
Nekias, this is a golden highlight for you.
Something that I haven't talked about yet. I was going to say I could go on like the Charlotte rant.
I mean, we should do the Charlotte rant because we're not going to talk about it later, so I would love to hear it.
I don't see us on this podcast in particular. I don't see us talking about the Charlotte Hornets anytime soon.
Let's get a 60-second Charlotte rant just for the audience to get out of it. We haven't talked about Charlotte in 8 months on this show.
Oh, well, then there you go. Shout out to Steve Clifford for getting buy-in on the defensive end. Best transition defense in the NBA post-All-Star break. Top 10 half-court defense since the All-Star break. Dennis Smith Jr. at the point of attack. Gordon Hayward chasing dudes off screens. JT Thor getting more playing time, taking on a multitude of matchups. Mark Williams getting more playing time, a little bit more scheme versatility than I thought. Also providing the presence at the rim. Nick Richards, who just got the contract extension, 3 years, $15 million. He's shown some growth defensively, playing at the level of the screen, doing a good job of cutting off drivers, also showcasing the ability to get back and recover, contest at the rim. That's been fun. It's just been a lot of long, rangy, athletic guys in the rotation just flying around, covering a bunch of ground. So that's my pitch. They've been good. They've been fun.
Wait, how you pitch the Hornets harder than us?
Because you laugh at me.
Significantly harder.
I asked you a Dennis Smith Jr. question at the end of the last pod. You hit me with pass. I don't know.
That was good.
Steve, what do you got for us? What's your random NBA thing that you're particularly hot on right now?
Boston changing their matchups after a timeout. And putting, basically, when they put Al Horford on a non-shooter and they flip the wings so they could switch everything, then you call a timeout. You think, oh, we got him. And now Al Horford's guarding someone completely different. So now he switches onto the big because you ran the action trying to get him and, thinking he was on someone else. And you're back in the same boat. It's my favorite thing I've noticed in the last 2 weeks.
I think what you can expect from Nekias and Steve on the dunker spot and what they have done over 150. Well, you guys are up to like 200 episodes, 212. I don't even know the number now. It's so
191.
191. All right, I was close the first time. I knew it was 190ish. What you can expect and what they have done, they are going to dive into the nuance of the NBA and what is happening on the court. And of course, like I'm sure every human does, there's some narrative stuff on your podcast because I've listened to it many times, but it really is about what is happening on the court. It is, for me, for someone that watches games every night and has to talk about the NBA oftentimes in a broad term, it is a great tool for me to talk about the NBA in micro terms because these guys are diving in, they are consuming basketball, and that is what I love about the show. It's why we wanted you to be a part of our family. All of their podcasts will be available on all audio platforms in partnership with Wondery, and all of their podcast videos, as well as any breakout videos, and hopefully we'll get to some film breakdown as well, will be available on the JJ Redick and 342 YouTube channel. Thank you guys for trusting in us, and we can't wait to build this out with you. Let's get to some questions that we have about what's going on in the league right now. Let's start in the Western Conference. We have basically 3 or 4 teams we want to talk about in each conference. I want to actually start with the Denver Nuggets. There's been a bunch of stuff over the last 2-3 weeks on Jokic's defense. It started with a number of montages, video montages of him giving up layups at the baskets to the San Antonio Spurs. And then some real stats started coming out, right? Of the 33 guys that have contested volume numbers at the rim, he's dead last in opponent field goal percentage. They've never really had a good defense under Mike Malone and with Jokic as a primary starter. They're 15th right now. They've been basically top 10 since mid-December. What do you see from their defense as we get closer to the playoffs, specific things that they can do to sort of mitigate some of these weaknesses they have in terms of rim protection?
Well, I mean, Denver's defense has always been based on their activity and their rotations, and Jokic's job is generally, I'm going to get to the level, we're going to fly around behind it, and he's done a good job of getting out of the liability area there. The thing with them is when they struggle, which they did earlier in the season, they didn't have those rotations. They were getting beat on closeouts. They were giving up shots. And that's more my biggest concern with Denver. Like, we can talk about Jokic all day, but if they don't have their pick and roll coverages down, if they're not flying around behind it, they're always scrambling in rotation, it's going to be tough. And the secondary part is there's just not a ton of scheme versatility. So outside of maybe playing Memphis and Ja Morant, Jokic in a drop or their bigs in a drop just doesn't make a ton of sense because you're letting guards and wings lead the dance. So they can either have space and take shots or get to the rim. My concern on top of that is just the dribble penetration. If their guards and their wings can't keep the ball in front. You see that in the non-Jokic minutes. You see that in the rare games when Jokic isn't in. If they're not going to be able to keep that ball in front, that opens up a whole wide spectrum of things. And before you go, Nekias, teams are going to start putting Jamal Murray in action in the playoffs.
Yeah, I saw that when I called their game a couple weeks ago against the Clippers. Down the stretch of that game, everything, and they would run, they'd hide him on one player and they'd manipulate, they'd do 2 ball screens just to get him in the action eventually so that he could either get in a switch with Kawhi or with PG or into a hedge and all of a sudden somebody's 4-on-3 downhill. Like I agree with you on that. And good teams are going to be doing that in the playoffs.
Yeah, and just to bounce off of Steve's point, like I think the lack of scheme versatility is what really pops for me. And I think it further highlights just how locked in they have to be when Jokic is at the level. And as Steve alluded to earlier, like beginning of the year when the defense was bad, the back end rotations weren't there. And with Michael Porter Jr. missing the stretch of time, you saw even when they were on time, the guys making the rotations at the rim were smaller. It was Bruce Brown sometimes. It was Jamal Murray sometimes. It's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So even if they were in position, picking up the roller or whatever you have there, the shot contest really didn't matter. And so some of when you look at Denver's like field goal percentage allowed numbers team wide, they're always going to be towards the bottom of the rim. Like one, as JJ mentioned earlier, like Jokic hasn't been a great rim protector. He's not a guy that provides a lot of impact there when contesting shots. But a lot of the times he's not even the one contesting the shot, depending on where the action is being ran if he's at the level. Sometimes that's just a lot of guards contesting shots. And so that's going to juice the numbers as well. And so when they're at their best, those rotations are locked in. And even when Jokic is in a drop, and I would say, one, he's not a good drop defender. Two, he has kind of grown positionally within the drop the last 2 years, but it's still a problem area. It can be serviceable if the guys in front of him can make that work. And as you saw, like they went on the 4-game losing streak earlier in the month and everything was just kind of going haywire. Like the drop was fine. And as they started to bounce back, you saw better play at the point of attack from Bruce Brown. You saw better play from Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. You saw a little bit more Christian Brown. And so if you have the screen navigation there to kind of insulate Jokic and protect him from having to contest as much at the rim, and you're forcing more mid-range shots, that can be enough. But I don't know where my faith level is in them being able to do so consistently in the playoffs.
You guys both bring up something that I think is important to point out about the Denver Nuggets. And look, I think on paper, I don't know what the advanced numbers are. On paper, you could make an argument that KCP is at least serviceable, if not an impact defender. You could make an argument for Bruce Brown and Aaron Gordon, at least serviceable and, potentially impact defenders. Michael Porter Jr. is not that. Jamal Murray's not that. And they don't have, like a lot of these other teams, Ja Morant, for example, has a top 3 defensive player, right? A lot of these other teams that have star players that have weaknesses have a guy that is hugely impactful defensively. I don't know that Jokic has that on his team. Am I wrong in that?
In theory, it should be Aaron Gordon.
Right.
But you can do so much to manipulate him away that, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think you're far off at all. And again, like I think if you're focusing the question in on like what Jokic does or doesn't do, like him not being able to navigate multiple schemes, like it further highlights where the rest of the guys are.
Yeah.
Because now you need those guys to be able to do multiple things since Jokic can't. And yeah, like I think Aaron Gordon I think he's a very good defender, honestly. I've been a little bit iffy on Bruce Brown this year because of some of the off-ball stuff, but when he's locked in and engaged, like he can be a very good one-on-one defender.
Yes.
MPJ has made some very important strides this year. I probably wouldn't go as far to say impact yet. He makes a big impact for this Denver team because when he's there and he's a 6'10" body that can rotate at the rim, that gives them gives them a better chance to compete defensively. But yeah, you compare them to other teams in the West, like I don't think the same infrastructure is there.
You think Christian Brown needs to play more?
I would like to see him play more, yeah. If for no other reason than just to get someone on the perimeter with a little bit more size than some of the guys that are playing.
It's fair. It's all fair points, guys. It's all fair points. And by the way, anytime we have you on the show, if you disagree with me, because actually the team we're going to talk about next, Nekias and I, on the trade deadline day, we're talking about this, but then we just randomly started talking about NBA basketball in the trade deadline, and the team that came up, of course, was the Phoenix Suns. And I wanted to sort of get your guys' take on them. I know we've only seen Kevin in 4 of these games. Assuming KD is healthy, right? What concerns do you have? Is there a reason that they should not be the favored team in the Western Conference to come out of the West and play one of the heavyweights from the East?
I think if you're removing, like health is just going to be number one. But if we're removing that out of the equation, it's just kind of the stability from whoever the 5th guy is. Whether that's Josh Okogie, whether that's Torrey Craig, like can those guys knock down enough shots? If you go to Landry Shamet or a spacer, Terrence Ross, can they defend well enough? And I think team wide, I always get pushback on this just because of the level of shot making that Phoenix has, but like, can they pressure the rim enough And can they win the paint enough in terms of getting to the free throw line? Like Monty Williams has been very upset with the free throw discrepancies over the last few games. But generally, this isn't a team that pressures the rim a lot. And the rim shots that they get, it's a lot of the stars creating gravity. And DeAndre Ayton, he's getting dunks. It's not a lot of guys getting hacked or just driving, putting their head down and getting down to the rim. So like, I do wonder if teams get comfortable switching and then crowding, like, can they combat that? And can they do enough to win on the interior? I think those would be my primary concern. I
think KD eases a lot of the concerns that I had before the trade. If we're talking, hey, the second unit, I know depth is a thing that's being talked about, but if you can close quarters with Kevin Durant or Devin Booker and then open the next with the other, that can help with that. I think KD is underrated in what he's going to add to this Suns defense, especially in the playoffs, with their love of playing team defense, with his ability to guard multiple positions, his weak side defense. I think for me, who's the fifth guy? Do they have enough two-way lineups that work for them? Is DeAndre Ayton still going to be able to hold up and pick and roll? That's always a question mark for me. And then what do you do about teams telling Chris Paul, please come here and defend?
And we saw that last year in the playoffs, particularly in that Dallas series where they targeted him almost the whole game, especially in Game 6. The thing about Phoenix, and I pointed this out in one of the games I had recently, Kevin was out, but I pointed it out. Torrey Craig caught a swing pass. They had put 2 on the ball, and Torrey Craig caught a swing pass at the top of the key, and he was wide open, and he hesitated. And I think he swung the ball, and then the next time down he shot it, or Josh Okogie shot it. But to me, that fifth guy, you talk about reliability and stability of that position. The fifth guy can't be what Josh Hart was towards the end of his Portland Trailblazers tenure. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, there can't be hesitation when you're the fifth guy. You've either got to cut out of the corner, cut out of the slot when there's 2 on the ball. You've got to either catch and drive. You've either got to shoot it right away. Like, to me, the concern is, does the fifth guy fuck up the flow? That's if he's missing shots. Remember the OKC Houston series when Lou Dort shot like, I don't know what it was, 2 for 15 one game, and then like the next game they just like left him open. Like, he kept shooting. To me, you're doing a disservice. The hesitation and the flow of the offense gets fucked up if you do what Torrey Craig did on that one possession. So I don't know who it is. I think it probably ends up being Okogie. That's the concern. And then the other concern with me is the shot profile in general. You guys brought up the rim pressure. I think Devin Booker, in particular over the last few weeks, has been more aggressive in attacking the basket, trying to get downhill, trying to put pressure on the rim, especially in pick and rolls where he's not settling as much. At least that's the eye test. I don't know what the advanced numbers say, but not settling as much in the mid-range. But when you talk about this team, you're talking about guys, Ayton, Paul, Booker, KD, that like live in the mid-range. You're not shooting a ton of free throws, and you're not necessarily night to night going to take and make a ton of threes. So do you run into a math problem against certain teams? That's a concern, legitimate concern for me.
I think that's fair. And even with Phoenix, like, not a high 3-point rate team, but they are a team that can generate a lot of stuff in the corners. But you think about who's taking those shots from the corners. It's going to be a lot of Torrey Craig or Josh Okogie or some of the guys that they're trying to stash. So I do wonder, like, if they're able to find the balance there. And honestly, I wonder with the 3-point shooting in general, that's a good point and something that I'm just trying to think through live. Like, I wonder if Phoenix is okay with not taking a bunch of threes, because when they're spacing, like if Kevin Durant is the single shooter on the side and he's in the corner, they may not be getting a 3 there, but that driving lane is opening up and they're making the mid-range opportunities easier, or they're opening up stuff at the rim. Like, I did a video breakdown on some of the buckets DeAndre Ayton got in the Minnesota game. And a lot of that was Devin Booker was in the strong side corner on one, Kevin Durant was in the strong side corner on one, and Ayton got dunks because the guy couldn't help down. And so if you have Chris Paul navigating things to pick and roll, or Devin Booker navigating things to pick and roll, you can't send help. You turn this into a 2-on-2, and that's how they get some fruitful looks there. So I wonder how they find that balance between really spacing and opening up the 3-point line, or just trying to make their inside the arc looks easier.
Where does TJ Warren fit in?
I think he's one of the guys, if he's also able to stay healthy, he's a guy that can knock down shots, but more importantly, he's a guy that can catch and go. And I think as JJ alluded to, like the Torrey Craig problem where he, on that one possession, he caught the ball, kind of hesitated and swung. TJ Warren will let it go or he will immediately catch and drive. That's something that he did in Indiana. It's something he did in Phoenix the first time. He's very comfortable just kind of cutting from the wing or attacking from the wing and getting downhill. So I think he has a role, especially with some of these hybrid second units, if you need someone else to take some pressure off of one of the main guys that's carrying the bench unit.
Let's move on to two other teams I wanted to discuss quickly in the Western Conference. The Sacramento Kings, they have a historic offense, best offensive rating in NBA history. Two guys that are in the conversation. We just did a whole thing on All-NBA on the old man and the three things, and I think both those guys, Fox and Sabonis, are in the discussion. Sabonis, to me, feels like it's more likely, but Fox, well-deserving of a spot if that's what it ends up being for that third team. Their defense has not been good. Particularly their five-man starting unit, surprisingly pretty putrid. Just how bad is their defense? And is it a fatal flaw in any playoff series?
The Kings defense talking point. Well, the good thing is they're going to give the effort, but because of how they're constructed, they are going to have to show at the level with Sabonis, and they're going to have to fly around behind him. And that is going to open things up. It always does when you're putting two on the ball in that way. You don't necessarily want to switch Sabonis. You don't want him in a drop. So now what do we do? And if they're flying around and getting beat on closeouts, the early help is in, but now you're opening looks. I always joke, even before the trade, every time Minnesota saw Sacramento, they were like, oh, cool, you guys aren't switching. We can play offense. So it's going to be something they have to deal with. Now, I am in the minority, and I went first because I know what Nekias is going to say. I am still in the minority that wants to see if a playoff series helps them out, if having a specific playoff game plan, if making adjustments game by game, having something they can focus in on, assist them. Maybe if a team decides, hey, we don't want to get into a complete track meet, let's slow things down. Maybe if that helps them out. Outside of pure pick and roll, the one fatal flaw is if they cannot keep the ball in front. If they can, I think they can do enough to defend the first 10 seconds of a team set or the first 10 seconds of possession. But if it's going to devolve into getting beat off the dribble, getting beat on cuts outside of the play, saw it in the game when they played Boston, it was like, oh, that's something that I don't know if they can overcome.
Well, I guess I will take it from here. I have my concerns with Sacramento's defense. I guess if you want to parlay that into like the earlier Denver conversation, it's Denver light in that, again, Sabonis is at the level. The rotations are going to be very important. The overall defensive personnel is also worse in Sacramento. And so like some of the scheme versatility questions that you have, like that's even more highlighted. And they don't have, like Denver has an Aaron Gordon who's probably sub-elite, but still very good. Who is, JJ mentioned the starting lineup and those defensive numbers. Who is Sacramento's best wing defender on the roster? Like that's probably still Harrison Barnes.
Yep.
I don't love that in a playoff setting.
Yeah.
And to Steve's point, it's not from a lack of effort. I have not watched the Kings game this year and say, oh, well, they just ain't tried on defense. So I do want to give the
right. They're not the Hawks. They're not the Hawks. Yeah. Wait, did I say that out loud?
Man, don't get me started on Atlanta, man. They've made me sad all year long. But no, like it's not an effort issue for them, but like the scheme versatility issues persist there. Man, like they do try to like switch some off-ball stuff 1 through 4, try to insulate Sabonis and try to flatten things out there. But like it does feel like a lack of containment, and they just don't have guys that can clean stuff up at the rim. Yeah, either. It's
you know what, I have compared Sabonis to Jokic this year as Sabonis is a different player, but it is a little Jokic light what he does right offensively in terms of his passing. And playmaking, his ability to bust out in transition and go all the way or go make a play for a shooter or go dribble right to a DHO. Like there's a lot of similarities there. I hadn't quite put that together though. And intuitively I should have, but they are a little like Denver because they run into sort of the same issues in terms of their schemes. And on top of that, their defenders, while Denver doesn't have great defenders, their defenders are even worse individually than Denver. So it would make sense that they're running into a lot of the same issues defensively that Denver does.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just to quickly correct myself. Like maybe if it's not Harrison Barnes, and maybe Kessler Edwards, but I don't know in terms of best perimeter defender on the roster now. But I just don't know what the playing time is going to look like for him in the postseason, considering some of the spacing concerns.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that teams are gunning for that 6 seed?
I would say so.
I think by default, they're the one team that doesn't have those guys. No offense to De'Aaron and Domantas Sabonis, but if my options are KD, Steph Curry, Kawhi, let's fight the Kings.
So it's interesting because I think let's take away the play-in. Let's say there was no play-in. The 6th seed to me would be obvious, right? If you're in the bottom half of the conference right now, because you do avoid Kevin Durant and the Suns. That's what it's looking like, at least the day we're recording this, that they will be the 4th seed, which means you're then potentially avoiding Jokic and the Nuggets, who've been the best team in the West all season. And then because it's the play-in on top of that, you're guaranteeing yourself a spot in the playoffs, right? Let's reverse the thing and say the Kings were in the position that Memphis is in. I don't think you're necessarily going to be gunning for the 7 spot and risking your entire season on one game. Do you know what I mean by that? It's like the confluence of the fact that, yes, that's the team that helps you avoid Kevin Durant and the Suns, and then potentially Denver. And on top of that, it's guaranteeing that you're in the playoffs. That's why it's such an attractive seed for a number of teams right now in the Western Conference. Let's talk real quick because we were talking, fatal flaws with the Kings, and Memphis has played as well as anyone of late in the NBA. They are currently the 2nd seed, potential first-round matchup like last year with Memphis or with Minnesota. Of course, it could be the Pelicans, it could be the Lakers, it could be Oklahoma City. We don't know yet. I argued the other day on First Take, they don't need Steven Adams in this first round necessarily. Now, if it's the Lakers, I think they do. But against like a Memphis, I think they're fine, or a Minnesota, I think they're fine. To me, it's that second round where you're potentially going against Sacramento. You're potentially going against Golden State. You maybe could be going against the Clippers. I don't know how it's all going to play out, but at some point they're going to need Steven Adams. Especially with Brandon Clark being out for this year, how important is Steven Adams for Memphis to have any shot of making a deep run in the Western Conference?
I think he's huge. I think his absence has been underrated with what he adds to their team as far as rebounding, as far as being a hub or a connector with handoffs once they flow into actions. The other part is their lineups are just tilted. And with Brandon Clark being out and Steven Adams being out, you only have so many options. So if you want to play 2 bigs, it's Jaren Jackson Jr. and it's Xavier Tillman. If you want to go small, it's Jaren at the 5 and Santi? Yeah. David Roddy? You can get away with that in the regular season. But if you're in a situation where a couple of those guys are getting hit in a playoff series, you run out of options back there. If Jaren Jackson Jr. gets in foul trouble,
that's a huge one. Yeah. Yep.
Now you're hoping Tillman, how he has to elevate even more. They need to have his minutes, his experience to at least unlock some of the possibilities for them. That's been one of my biggest concerns is like, where are they going to go if things go left?
Yeah, just to bounce off of that, like both of those are just major losses. Like what Steve said about what Steven Adams brings to the table, very important. And Brandon Clark, just the juice that he plays with as a roller, him being able to not only unlock their small ball lineups, but just the level of switchability that he provides helps flatten some stuff out. And so not having him, I think, hurts quite a bit. I think they miss Steven Adams more on the offensive end. Like he's one of the best offensive rebounders in NBA history, and I don't think that gets enough discussion, honestly. Beyond that, what Steve hit on, him being a connector and being a hub, I think that helps because something that we both talked about throughout the year. What is this half-court offense, 1? And 2, what is this half-court offense in the fourth quarter?
I can answer the last one for you. It's John Morant pick and roll.
No, that is the main concern, right, about anything, even with Steven Adams, is their ability or at times inability to score in the half court, especially late game. It's why I've been shouting from the rooftops all season, like Desmond Bane is the key to this team. But then with the march that Jaren Jackson Jr. has had, he's not shot the ball great, but he's scored at a level that he hasn't probably in his career, at least, consistently for this stretch of games. What have you guys sort of seen from him? What is he doing differently over the last 14, 15 games that has allowed him to produce the way he has without shooting the ball well?
It's the aggression. It's the mindset. It's looking to steal and get deep post-ups. It's the way that Memphis uses him. So having guards set pin downs for him when he's at the block and having him fly off that way, using him in pick and roll, having him in post-ups, letting him attack in space. There's just different ways they're using him within the context of their offense, and they're asking him to do more things. And he's responded by being aggressive, which they've needed, especially with Ja being out and with Adams being out at times. And so for me, it's just him attacking and being physical, looking for his spots and being used in different areas.
Yeah, I like that. Let's run through these in the Eastern Conference real quick. So I want to bring up Boston because they beat the shit out of Milwaukee last night. If I'm not mistaken, everybody played, right? It wasn't like there were important players. Giannis played. Drew played.
Middleton left early.
Oh, right. Middleton got hit in the face. So the metrics, the spreadsheet would say Boston and their title chances are very favorable. You could make an argument, record aside, that they're the most complete, best team in the NBA. What are the concerns you have about their team? I have my own, of course. And is there a specific player? Is there a strategy? Is there a scheme that you're looking for them to do in the playoffs that you think is a huge key for them to win a championship this year?
I think for me, it's just going to be offensive decision-making in general is kind of what I'm eyeing with Boston. I think the shot profile kind of speaks for itself. Like, they are a team that can spread you out. And as we saw in the Milwaukee game, if the shots are falling, there just isn't much you can do with them. And with the way that some of these guys shoot, Jayson Tatum with the high release point, Jaylen Brown just doesn't care about contests. Like, even if you're there, it might not matter. But as Steve and I kind of talked about earlier in the week, they can get a little quick on the trigger with some of these shots. And so for me, it's like, how do you find the balance between getting to those? How do you get the threes that they take? Because they've been like top 5 in terms of 3-point rate all year long. So I don't have a problem with them taking the shots. It's when are they taking them and what are they doing to open those looks up? At their best, it's, when fully healthy is Robert Williams being used above the break as a handoff hub, or you got 2 pin downs on one side. Now you got Jaylen Brown curling in or Jayson Tatum curling in. Now it's a drive and kick you going, or Marcus Smart getting downhill and he's kicking to those guys. Like in that Washington game, it was I'm dribbling the ball up, is one pass and I'm firing. I don't think they can play like that and make a finals run. I think just just what their overall offensive process is going to be is where I'm kind of eyeing on Boston.
Well, for me, offensively, it's Jayson Tatum drives. If we get the version of Jayson Tatum that is putting his head down, making quick decisions, while also making the threes, while also blending in the post-ups, coming off screens and hurting teams that way, opens up a whole different thing for Boston. For me, it's defensively, can they hit the high notes that they've shown this season? They have the ability to throw these lineups out there where you're looking, you're like, who do we attack? Who is the mismatch? Oh, wait, I don't think there is one. They can switch everything. They can keep Allen a drop. They can put Allen a lesser shooter, and now Marcus Smart's guarding your big, and now everything's a switch. They think you have a mismatch. Here comes Al to kick them out of the matchup. Can they hit those high notes, and how does that versatility help them in the playoff setting? Because I think if that defense doesn't carry with them, the margin for error goes down.
Right, with the variability in three-point shooting, and they've been a great three-point shooting three-point shooting team all season in terms of percentage, but there is variability night to night, and with the wrong matchup, if the defense is not working like it should, you could lose a playoff series. I've got 2 things to follow up on. So I loved Nekias' comment there about offensive decision making, because to me, I'm betting that the high notes of the defense show up. I'm betting come playoff time with their personnel, their mentality, how close they were last year. Like, this is from a human perspective. The fucking effort, the communication, all that shit, it's going to be there. I have no doubt. In the playoffs, that shit's loading to Giannis in the conference finals, if that's what it comes to. I don't have any doubt that's going to happen. It comes down to offensive decision-making for me. And it's not just when to shoot. It's not just who to pass to. To me, it's the last 5 minutes of a game. How are we going to play? Are we going to play some variation of how we just played for 43 minutes? Or are we going to stand around and matchup hunt and take contested, tough jumpers? Because when they do that, you talk about margin for error. Hey, guess what? Their margin for error changes a lot when they decide to play a different way. You watch them for 2 seasons play that way, up until January of last year, basically. It's not a formula for success. Their formula for success is body and ball movement. That's how they get layups. That's how they get open threes. When they strictly go matchup hunting, and there's point in times and there's possessions when you have to do it and you should do it, but when they go to strictly that down the stretch of a game, that's when I worry. The guy for me is Derek White. Like, I think he's had one of the most underrated seasons in the NBA. He's had a bunch of different roles. He's had moments where he's the 3rd or 4th usage guy for a couple weeks. He's had moments where he's the 7th or 8th. His some nights he guards the primary shot creator. Some nights he's coming off he just does everything for this team. In particular, and I started tracking this right before he got hurt a couple weeks ago in that Brooklyn Knicks home stretch that I called. But when Robert Williams got hurt on that Friday, I had tracked it before the game. They were at the time 119 offensive rating, 100 defensive rating. That duo, they're right now at 118 offensive rating, 101 defensive rating. The two of them on the court together, especially defensively, is fucking awesome for this team. And Derek White, to me, has been as good of a role player in the NBA that we've had this season.
Oh, 100% cosign. And just on the Derek White front, like, the jumper is going to be important for him. And it's helpful that he's knocked down threes at a pretty high clip throughout the year. And if he can do that, like, the playmaking is there, the way Boston uses him as a screener on and off the ball, adds some value there and helps create some of those mismatches or just helps scramble defenses depending on what the scheme is. And defensively, like, he's been one of the best defensive guards in basketball, period. Like, if he doesn't end up on an all defense team, like, that's going to be rant material for me on a future episode. Oh, but he's been tremendous.
We wanted to switch to Cleveland, guys, particularly the late game execution stuff. What are your thoughts heading into the playoffs?
Well, for me, I just need them to get their tempo up. There's no need to take 14 seconds to set up one action, and now you are up against the shot clock, being a team with 2 bigs most of the time and a person that teams will help off of. Give yourself a chance, keep pressure on defenses. I think late game offensively, it's just how do you use Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland together? I know they like to run horns. They try and get teams to mess up a switch and get a slip there. Is it going to devolve to your turn, my turn? Are you going to trust your bigs in that scenario? Is this just pick and roll or bust? And then for me, if we're talking a late game concern, it's the other end of the floor where can Darius Garland nail his pick and roll coverage? Are you going to put Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell in action together? Can Mobley and Allen clean that up?
Okay, just to bounce off of Steve, secondary question, like, will Mobley and Allen be out there together? Has Evan Mobley grown enough to close games at the 5? Like, I think so individually. Also, do they have enough reliable wings that they can close small when Allen's healthy? And will they decide to do so? And then what does that open up on the offensive end? To the offensive point, like, tempo is the big thing. Steve already hit on it. I do wonder sometimes, like, who's going to be the primary decision maker at the end of games. I think Donovan Mitchell is a better scorer for sure. I think Darius Garland, what he does as a playmaker, and if he sees drop late in games, like, he's just playing with defenses, can get to the floater whenever he wants to, can get the pull-up threes, can find Evan Mobley or Jared Allen or either one of those if they're on the floor together, can find those guys on lobs. And so even if the tempo isn't great, he just plays at his own pace anyway. And so he can kind of bail them out of those kind of unfavorable processes in terms of the tempo being played offensively. So just keeping an eye there. What Steve hit on my primary scheme concerns for me, it's who's on the floor in the final 5 minutes. Like, will it be Karras? Will it be Chetty? Will it be Dean Wade? Will it be Isaac?
I will say, They have found different ways to use Okoro. The shooting numbers are up, but you will see him being used as a screener. And that's part where I'm intrigued, because you can't necessarily put someone on him if they're going to unlock that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just quick note, because was one of my questions too that Tommy just asked, and I think it's important to note they played 43 clutch time games this year. They're 22-21. It's interesting because they've been a top 2 or 3 net rating team all season. They have the most double-digit wins in the NBA this season, and they've just been average in clutch games. And I know they've beaten Boston actually in a couple of clutch games, overtime games. Windy on First Take last week said something really interesting about Cleveland clutch time, and it's literally the physique. He's like, it's literally the fact that Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell are 2 smaller guards, and you're asking them to create at the end of a game when defenses shrink and offenses slow down against size. And on the other end of the floor, you're probably going to try to target one of those 2 guys, if not both of them. You mentioned involving them in the same pick and roll action, and you're going to run into a size issue. And I think that's interesting, which is why I wanted to follow up on a face that Steve just made when Nekias mentioned Evan Mobley closing solo, and it looked like Steve wanted to say something to that, and I'm intrigued by that because that's how they had to close the other night in a clutch time game against the Hawks. Evan Mobley had an unbelievable, block shot at the rim down the stretch. Of course, DeJounte Murray hit a tough step back jumper to kind of seal that game. But Steve, what did you want to sort of say about that scenario and that, who's on the floor? J.A. off the floor, now Evan Mobley at the 5. What are your thoughts on that?
I have liked the shift from Cleveland to put Mobley at the 5 to unlock him and play those smaller lineups. For me, I don't know that they can afford it defensively to not have both of them on the floor, especially because who are you putting out there? Because if you're putting Karis LeVert out there as well, that's probably another person that the other team's going to be like, hey, you also could come here if we would like to attack you. Yeah. So I think, and it's the flip side, because Mobley and Allen together can clean up a lot of those breakdowns that potentially could happen.
Yeah, it's a valid point. And I also, just so we're clear, because I have talked about a number of players that teams could potentially target on this podcast, and I feel very confident that I can be the one to talk about those players because I was a guy that was often targeted, frequently targeted, actually, especially later in my career. Guys, there's a million more things we could touch on. We do have to be cognizant of our time here, and we'll have you guys on again. I'll be joining your pod, I'm sure, at some point during the playoffs to chat about some stuff. Again, we are so excited to have you part of the 342 Productions family, and it's going to be awesome. This has been a great conversation. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you for having us, and excited to be working with you guys moving forward.
Yes, sir.
Can't wait. Let's go.
That's the kind of energy I need. All right.